The UAE and the GCC countries are now heavily investing into renewable energy. They have now become a global hub for fossil fuel energy, but they've also become a global hub for clean energy, clean technology, and climate tech. Dubai does not rely on oil and gas. It only represented at best 3 to 4% of GDP. And then they diversified more and more. Today, they've diversified their economy so well that the non-oil economy represents 75% of the economy, particularly in our part of the world. You have water stress. We live in a desertic climate, and as temperatures increase, we're already beyond 2 degrees Celsius. Just look across the region. We have two major rivers. The origin of those rivers, the Euphrates and the Nile, all originate outside the region. So you can easily see that water wars are on the horizon. So you've got to address the issue of water and water availability for growing populations, particularly in desertic climates. We have the technology. We have access to the technology. We know what needs to be done. But paradoxically, I think human nature being what it is, we're living in the Anthropocene age, right? We've created a climate crisis. Now, paradoxically, the climate crisis will force you to adapt. It's only when you're at the edge of the cliff that you start taking action. I think we're already at the edge of the cliff.
Dr. Saidi, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and presence.
Thank you. It's a good cause.
It's a great cause. It's unbelievable. Before we start, can I just ask a question? What has led you to being here now? How did you end up believing in the cause, getting the what got you here?
Well, I'm an economist and have been a professional economist all my life. And as an economist, became increasingly aware of climate risks. I was at the time chief economist of the DIFC, and I wanted the DIFC to become the global hub for financing climate and new energy and clean energy. But this was way ahead of the curve because you're in a country which was focused on selling fossil fuel energy, oil and gas. And even for the financial markets, the idea that you would become a global hub wasn't very attractive to them because you're way ahead in terms of it. Now, 13, 14 years later, is the time, I think. So that's why I founded the Clean Energy Business Council, because I think it made a great deal of sense. The UAE and the GCC countries are now heavily investing into renewable energy. They understand what the energy transition means. And fundamentally, what's really very interesting is that they have now become a global hub for fossil fuel energy, which they understand very well that they've been producing for 50, 60 years. But they've also become a global hub for clean energy, clean technology, and climate tech. And this is unique anywhere in the world. No other region in the world combines the two. Hub for old energy, hub for new energy and clean energy. So the CBC, in a way, I hope, contributed to that, certainly in terms of the vision.
They were much more, being in Dubai, did you find they were much more open-minded about it when you started getting it going? And
Yes, and part of the reason is that people don't understand that Dubai does not rely on oil and gas. It only represented at best 3 to 4% of GDP. And then they diversified more and more. So they're not tied to oil and gas. The UAE as a whole is more oil and gas oriented. But today, they've diversified their economy so well that the non-oil economy represents 75% of the economy. So oil now is only 24, 25%. So that's a major achievement. And what that means is that you've liberated yourself from the dependence on oil and gas and on oil and gas revenue. Just to give you an example, if I look at Abu Dhabi, their income from their sovereign wealth funds and financial assets now exceeds their income from oil and gas because they've saved it,
Yeah.
they've invested it, and those returns are greater than your oil and gas returns. That's a bit the example of Norway, which is another example, which just put all their oil and gas revenue into a sovereign wealth fund. And so they don't rely on it. They give a portion of it to the government, but the bulk of it gets invested to future generations. Because the fundamental idea is that oil and gas is not renewable resource, right? If you exhaust it, there's nothing left for future generations. So we should invest it, keep it for future generations, if you care about intergenerational equity. And so this is what's happening. And I think that's a fantastic transformation.
You expect to be so like that in Dubai? So if I asked you 15 years ago, would Dubai be in where we are today? Are you impressed, or do you think there's a lot more to be done?
No, I'm very impressed because we've got the biggest solar power plant in the world in Dubai, UAE. So they're following the footsteps really of China. Um, they're now focusing on electric vehicles, energy efficiency, hydrogen, etc. So the transition is already happening here, or has happened, in fact. So that's very encouraging because Dubai, UAE is used as an example by other GCC countries. They look at it, but also other countries in the Middle East, which are energy dependent. So if you look at the diversification that took place, it gives you, and how it was done, it gives you a path towards the energy transition. So we're very lucky to have the GCC and to have UAE and Saudi.
I was in Guangzhou recently, and I think the last time I was in Guangzhou would have been about 20 years ago. I was there recently, and I couldn't get over their conversion to electric vehicles. The roads were silent. Like they seem to be embracing this, electrical way much more mainstream. And do you think that's they are the example that you go by?
It's one of the examples, certainly. I think China is at the forefront for many different reasons. Part of the reason is that they plan long term.
Yeah.
They have a 5-year plan. And so it's not a matter of saying, let's the private sector do it. No, you cannot count just on the private sector. It has to be driven from the top. So as part of their industrial policy, they look at outcomes, not announcements and pronouncements. Today, all major companies listed on financial markets all have their ESG commitments and reports and all the rest. But those are, in many cases, empty. What you need to do is to look at outcomes, not box ticking for ESG. I think that has to be put behind us. You need to think about what is your industrial strategy. As an economist, as an economist, I worry about industrial policy because it can mean protectionism. What you need to do is to have intelligent industrial policies and strategies, which means that you set clear objectives, you remain competitive, and you ask your private sector and your companies to be competitive. And I think the big advantage that China has, which can also be followed in the GCC, is the role of state-owned enterprise. They're given direction, they're told this is our strategic objective, and they follow it. They work at it, and they're rewarded accordingly. And local government is also rewarded accordingly. So when they go into electric vehicles and batteries and chips, they do it on a strategy basis. And they might overinvest and you might hold over capacity short term, but the long term, you lowered your costs. Look at, for example, electric vehicles and batteries. The cost has gone down, and solar power. The cost has gone down by 90% in 10 years. So if you're sitting in Europe or the Gulf countries, and you look at BYD or other electric vehicles coming from China, they're half the cost of a Tesla or somebody else. The reason is that they've made the investments and they're going through an e-drive and electrification. We need to pursue the same thing. Now, the model might be a bit different. You might want greater capital market involvement. You might want, obviously, more private sector involvement, but the path should be very clear.
I know they were saying before about tariffs, and I'll just use America example. They don't let the Chinese cars into the market because they think they will obliterate the market. Do you think though there's a media bias because they are Chinese? That's why they're not letting these into certain countries.
If you recall, if you look at Europe, there was something called the green economy, right? You wanted to go green. Now Europe is tending to forget green for many reasons. Part of it is geopolitics and what's happening with Ukraine and Russia and all the rest. And so they're diverting resources away from the green economy. And the automobile manufacturers, of course, and the steel industry and everything else that goes into automobiles finds it wants to protect itself.
Yeah.
Whereas the better model would have been to ally yourself with the Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay. Let them open their factories in Europe, employ European workers, but adopt their technology.
Yeah.
They know how to do it. They've done it. The answer is not, please protect me for some reason. You have to adapt to change.
Yeah.
And if you don't adapt to change, you get swallowed up in one form or another.
Besides, actually, tell me about e-mobility.
So we have a working group on e-mobility, which is electric vehicles and everything surrounding electric vehicles, to promote it, to look at what policies need to be in place. How do you put in a national charging station? How do people get aware of it? What should we be doing to promote electric vehicles in general? But e-mobility is much wider because it also means that your towns, cities, and rural areas also have to be adapted. Then we have one on hydrogen working group, again, because hydrogen is fast growing. It's one of those solutions many countries are looking for. And many countries from the region are starting to export hydrogen from the GCC countries. So we felt that should be a major area. So we have a working group on that. And we have another one, which is women in clean energy. I promote the role of women in clean energy because they don't necessarily know what's happening in climate tech, clean energy, and so we try to promote the role of women.
Yeah.
So, for example, my co-chair of the CBC has always been a lady, a woman.
Okay.
And this year as well, we're starting a new working group. It's going to be on the water and energy.
Nice.
Because particularly in our part of the world, you have water stress. Remember, many of the we live in a desertic climate, and as temperatures increase, we're already beyond 2 degrees Celsius. So heat is increasing, means you need more air conditioning. So district cooling helps you with that, but you also need more water for growing population.
Yes.
So if you just look across the region, we have 2 major rivers. The origin of those rivers, the Euphrates and the Nile, all originate outside the region.
Yeah.
So you can easily see that water wars are on the horizon. So you've got to address the issue of water and water availability for growing populations, particularly in desertic climates. You don't have the water.
Yeah.
You don't have rivers. You don't have rainfall. So our working group is going to be dedicated to that, looking at the relationship between water and energy. What do we do? How do we improve water management, water systems across the region? And hopefully it's another area where you need cooperation across countries of the region. So we're aiming to play that role along with various bodies. We work also with the United Nations, World Bank, IRC, IMF, and also regional organizations. So that's really the purpose of the CBC.
Amazing. What are the biggest opportunities for the Middle East to take a leadership role in the global clean energy transition at the moment?
I think it's certainly in terms of solar power.
Solar power is amazing. Yeah.
And the other two, I think we mentioned district cooling
Yeah.
and desalination. If you look at countries, particularly in Africa, by 2050, 1/4 of the world's population is going to be living in Africa. And 1/3 of the labor force is going to be African in Africa.
Yeah.
Okay. That means that massive investments are going to be made into infrastructure and massive energy requirements. It is not easy. And then you have to put together the grids. If you look at, let me call it old energy, you're linked through national grids. Solar power is not grid dependent.
Yeah.
You can have a solar power plant anywhere. Okay, you don't need to be linked to a national grid. So I think from an economic development perspective, solar power and everything related to that, batteries and the like, is going to be a major way this part of the world can help, along with district cooling and the desalination.
Yeah.
And remember, desalination is not just seawater. It can be any water which is brackish that needs to be recycled and cleaned and all the rest. The other area, I think, which is critical, is that this part of the world has capital.
Yeah.
And has been providing aid to many countries. So if you look at many of the major companies like Mazda and others, they can help countries in financing their transition towards clean energy and clean technology. So it's a combination of having access to the technology, having the capital, but also having the companies that can make you do it. Okay. The other aspect which is important is that there's obviously, of course, a lot of investment now going into AI, including into data centers. Saudi and the UAE are major investors now and establishing data centers.
Yeah.
And they can help other countries, particularly in Africa and Asia and all the rest, also establish data centers.
Okay.
But let those data centers be green data centers. In other words, data centers, as we know, use a lot of energy. But if you use solar power or any other type of renewable energy for the data centers, then they become green data centers.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win whereby you have electrification, you have data centers, you've got access to AI. It means that for many developing countries in Africa, Asia, but also in the Middle East,
Yeah.
you've let them join the digital economy. This is the final objective at the end of the day. So instead of cities and people being isolated, they get into the digital economy, they're onto the internet, they can provide services online. You can educate them online. You can provide health services through robots, etc., all of that. So that all comes together.
Yeah.
And the GCC countries can help in that because, as I said, they have the capital, they have the technology, they have the know-how, and they have the willingness to.
I was going to say the willingness to prove it.
Yes.
If you could give one piece of advice to policymakers, corporate leaders, and investors looking to drive meaningful change, what would that be?
I think you have to think long term. This is not short term. Let me explain what I mean. A lot of emphasis is going into ESG and ESG reporting, and big companies do that. That's fine. But what you need is outcomes. If you look at portfolios and portfolio managers, their horizon is just 1 quarter ahead, and they get rewarded on quarterly results.
Yeah.
What we're talking about in terms of adapting to climate change, making the investments is much more long term. So you need patient capital that goes beyond just 1 quarter or several quarters, but half a decade or decade.
Yeah.
So that means your financial markets have got to adapt. Your sovereign wealth funds and governments have got to adapt. And so you have to have a national plan.
Okay.
That I think is critical. You have to look across sectors and you have to bring in the private sector. And this is where I think industrial policy becomes important. What is it that you want to achieve? Don't look at, for example, net zero, right? So everybody is promised net zero by 2050,
Everyone's on it. Yeah.
by 2050. But we're not going to be around in 2050, right? Many of those people who are signing off those declarations are not going to be around to be held accountable.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is, what are your investments in technology? How are you going to make that happen? Look at outcomes, not what you're pronouncing as being policies or commitments.
Yeah.
So that's what the Chinese have been very successful at. So have a clear set of objectives, hold people accountable for that, not their pronouncements and their reports.
How do you see the next 5 to 10 years shaping the relationship between clean energy, economic growth, and social well-being in the Middle East? How do you think it's going to be?
I think the Middle East is not one cohesive body.
Yeah.
You've got the GCC countries that are way ahead. They have the capital. They can invest. They can adapt. Many countries in the region are too poor.
Okay.
What do I do in Sudan? UK, even in Egypt, major countries, and one of the biggest countries in the Middle East with a large population. So the ability to adapt and to mitigate risk because of climate change is different across the countries of the region. So what we need to do is that GCC countries, I think, have got to able think regionally.
Yeah.
There are many reasons, because we're facing the same issues. So, for example, I'm in favor of having a climate bank, establishing a climate bank.
Yeah.
I think the GCC countries can help. And so instead of giving aid, I would give trade. I would give trade instead of aid.
Right.
I would help them in terms of adopting technology,
Yeah.
solar power, etc. So I think that should be on the horizon. And then there are many things that we need to do together. At the GCC level, I think we need to move towards a common market. It was announced a long time ago, but we need to make it happen.
Yeah.
Because you've got to coordinate policies in terms of infrastructure, right? Not everybody needs a super duper solar power plant. What you need is the grids to connect you across the region. Same as for transport and for many other systems, right? Okay. So, but the point is, I think that I'm, for one, I'm optimistic in terms of the future, because we have access to the technology. We know how to use it. And I think this is the time at which everybody in the region can benefit from that. So in many ways, there are reasons to be optimistic. And my hope is that we'll be able to garner all the finances that's required in the financial markets or the private sector. But you need, as I mentioned, patient capital.
Get across line.
The sovereign wealth funds can look and are patient capital. So they can de-risk private sector investments.
Yeah.
We can help issue bonds and sukuk for climate projects and infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the sovereign wealth funds and the countries can take the bottom line risk, okay, which will encourage the private sector. If you ask a private sector company to invest 15 years, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
But if you tell them, I will buy the energy from you, and I'm there to provide a stop loss, then you provide them with the incentives. So we need to restructure our capital markets. Our capital markets globally, not just here in the region, are very short term in terms of the thinking. Think back a little bit on how we finance railroads. Railroads had to have patient capital.
Yeah.
But they transformed economies. The secret about infrastructure is that it can transform your economy, transform geography. Your economic geography changes through infrastructure. The type of infrastructure we need today is very clear. We know what is required from a sustainability and climate risk point of view. What you need is the capital markets to help them. So central banks have got to work at it. Financial market regulators have got to work at it. Governments have to say, these are the objectives, okay? And I'm willing to contribute.
Yeah.
And then the private sector will come in if you provide them with a clear strategy and known objectives and outcomes.
What gives you hope that economic systems and clean energy markets can evolve fast enough to address the climate and sustainable challenge globally?
I mentioned that we have the technology. We have access to the technology. We know what needs to be done. But paradoxically, I think human nature being what it is, we're living in the Anthropocene age, right? We've created a climate crisis. Now, paradoxically, the climate crisis will force you to adapt. It's only when you're at the edge of the cliff that you start taking action. I think we're already at the edge of the cliff. So that, I think, will galvanize efforts. I think more important is young people.
Okay.
When I look across countries, it is young people who are suffering, who are saying, they're telling me in my generation of people, the baby boom generation and the following generation, what did you leave us with? What sort of climate environment am I going to be able to raise my kids?
Yeah.
Or are we all going to die because of climate change? Young people now are much more, they become climate activists in many ways. That gives me hope.
Good.
What we need is to have their voice heard and translated into policies. So when I look at young people, because we said we have the technology, we know all that. Politicians have got to start listening to young people much more and involve them in terms of policies and strategies moving forward. So my hope really, if there is one, is that young people will become much more active.
Amazing. Dr. Nasser, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to continued collaboration and thank you for your time, Miguel. Thank you very much.